once again. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much. I am super happy and grateful to be here with you at Bar Convent at the SIP Lounge today. And we want to discuss how bars impact the economy and shape neighborhoods and cities. And for that, I was invited to moderate. Just let me introduce myself. I'm Luam Gipramariam. Most people in nightlife actually call me Lou. I started as a bartender, and now I do very different things. I consult. I have my own agency, consulting on diversity, equity, inclusion. I sit on the executive board of the Club Commission, and sometimes I moderate as well. And I have two stakeholders in nightlife with me tonight, this afternoon. One being Francis Henlon. Hi Francis, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to be here with everybody. I've heard great things about the day thus far. My name is Francis. I work at a queer venue in Prenzlauer Berg here in Berlin called Tipsy Bear Berlin. We ourselves opened in March of 2019, so we're coming up next year, early next year, on 5 years, which is very exciting. The venue itself is a bar. We're not overly large. We have a capacity of about 90 to 100. And what we have established ourselves as is a lot of queer programming, creating presence and space and attention for queer community and local queer community here in Berlin, also from a migratory background. Throughout the venue as well, we've had our, like many other venues have, our fair share of challenges in the past few years, especially relating to the pandemic, to inflation, rising costs, and also...
We'll get into that for sure, yeah.
And also, of course, the very sort of stock standard issues with noise complaints from neighbours as well, which were definitely very challenging to move through for ourselves. We were thankful to have the assistance of the Club Commission and the Schallschutz funds, which triggered a closure in December of last year for a soundproofing renovation, and then through communication with the local Bezirksamt and the successful completion of those projects, we were very happy to then sort of enter this year in a far better space than we were before, in a far more protected space.
Okay, I think we're going to dissect what you said as an introduction a little bit more while we're talking. And I hand it over to Merrick, who's more of a global stakeholder in nightlife. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you all for joining. My name is Merrick Milan. I'm from Amsterdam. I also started in a bar, I think like many of you. I organized parties for 15 years in Amsterdam, electronic music.
Surprise, I saw people nodding.
And I actually started, my first internship was at a fetish party in Amsterdam called Wasteland. And my people at school asked me, hey, so yeah, you're doing an internship. And I said, yeah, this is a great party, 3,000 people, a lot of decoration, a lot of shows. Oh, great, well done. I said, yes, and where is it? I said, well, it's Wasteland. And then they were like, okay, just go ahead. So I was actually happy that I got that support. But that was something that I learned a lot about the industry and the scene and everything, and working together with different people. And in 2012 I was elected as the night mayor, the nightlife mayor of Amsterdam, which is a position where I advise the mayor of Amsterdam and city council on what's important for nightlife and what's important for the hospitality industry, what's important for bars and clubs and also festivals. And that's a role that has grown now to more than 100 cities around the world that have a similar position. Club Commission being, of course, here in Berlin, a very important player. True advocate, real advocacy. So yeah, I'm very much rooted in advocacy work, and that's what I would like to speak about today a bit as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. I think it's important to kind of zoom out a little, because titles like, what's the impact, or like, it's, you have to start somewhere. So in order to start, let's zoom out, and I want to hear from you guys. How would you define like the economic impact of bars towards neighborhoods and cities? Like you mentioned a few things. I think it's very interesting also when you started. You mentioned 2019. I wasn't aware, and then the pandemic happening. I would like to understand, one, how is it economically for you at the moment, and what do you think is the economic impact to your neighborhood and city of you being there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely, I think the pandemic had different effects on numerous different people in many, many different ways, and I think especially nightlife and bars around the world fought it and faced different challenges. I think I can speak for our experience here in Berlin that we were quite fortunate. I think that Berlin has, especially in the last 5-6 years, been able to create a lot of structures for support on a governmental and state level as well, that are doing quite a lot to acknowledge the economic and the cultural impact of bars and the nightlife sector as a whole. I think that really contributed to our ability as a venue. Also, our experience is a very new venue. I myself am not a native German speaker either, nor would I try to claim that I'm fluent. And I think that Berlin had a recognition, which was really important, of the cultural impact of venues such as ours, and really made the support structures quite available. From narratives from other cities with bars and nightlife institutions, I think there were other cities that didn't have that level of fortunate accessibility to support structures, to funding schemes. We were very lucky to be able to keep our staff paid through the process. We were lucky to be able to also use the time closed, receive funding to actually make investments into the improvement of the venue in many ways. So I think that recognition was really, really beneficial for us. I do think that on a whole, bars do have a really big contribution on an economic level through employment in a city as well, but also just on a social level in terms of really creating a social fabric within a city, within a space. They are a place that are quite accessible when we look at different areas of nightlife. We have some nightlife such as clubs and so on that may be later night. They tend to be a bit more expensive. They tend to be a bit more curated around certain specific communities, and I think bars have a really nice element within a city that they can be quite open. They're quite accessible. Often there's minimal barrier to entry, but I think from that stems, and there's also simply just a lot more of them. They fill into people's sort of weekly routines a little bit more often than perhaps a night out does, and what stems from that is a really big economic impact within a city, within an urban landscape, through means of employment, through means of the business itself. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of bars that they're able to provide within an urban landscape.
Yeah, definitely fully agree with everything you said. I think when we zoom out, what I really think is an interesting thing for cities also to look at is how small venues and bars and venues and other places help to develop areas in the city. In Amsterdam, of course, Berlin, but even also London or basically everywhere in the world. Many bars and small venues they help on two levels. I think in area development, making an area a more interesting place to go to, but also I think, and that's like the economic impact that I think they have, is the talent development aspect that is there. As I said also, and many of you here, I started working in a bar when I was 16. It helped me to develop my talents. It helped me to figure out what I wanted to do in life, when it comes to, in my case, organizing parties. So I think working on grassroots level in small bars where the entry level is it's easy to get in. I think that's a real value that these small bars and the small communities that they support, that they have. And so that's what I'm saying. I think your venue is also is it in Prenzlauer Berg? Yeah, a place which is a little bit less popular here in Berlin, as I understood, right? So
I mean, just to clarify, I don't think it's less popular, it's just very gentrified. It used to be one of those places where people used to be very young, it's been very leftist, progressive, maybe a little artsy.
Yeah.
But then it kind of shifted, a lot of places left for other areas, clubs shut down, bars shut down, and I think it's very interesting that you guys chose basically that place to repopulate in a way. And I think that's also very interesting to think about repopulation in this like tension field between what you said, we're making a place cool, we're adding something to an area in a neighborhood, but then also there's this effect of gentrification, like you're constantly having to balance out between the two of them. And I would like to hear a little bit, if you can say something about what it's like to be in an area that you're repopulating with your content and space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a very fascinating question of intention of why you choose a location, and especially when you have a location, what you want to try and achieve with it. Of course, the first step is always finding a location which you can never have complete control over. But once we did find where we were in Prenzlauer Berg, we were really happy to try and create something that we felt wasn't actually existing to the level that we wanted to see in the neighborhood that which we lived. Our venue is focused around queer community. There aren't many queer venues in Prenzlauer Berg. There's plenty of queer-friendly venues, let's say. But I also think what we were seeing, or our intention behind forming the space, and like any space, it started with an idea and then grew very naturally on its own. And a lot of that natural growth was actually a reflection of the community that was visiting. We originally opened as a queer space, trying to provide a safer space to members of our community, where they could feel more comfortable, more seen, more heard, able to express themselves. And then what stemmed from that was a few performances that we do, maybe on the weekend, and then that grew this sort of community, and very naturally the sort of fabric of our venue actually developed and grew over the course of 4 years in ways that weren't only controlled by ourselves, but also a direct reflection of the people visiting and what they were looking for. And beautiful stories have come from our venue of people who've began their gender transitions or found gender euphoria, have found comfort with their own sexuality, have been able to mitigate through conversations with different factors of the community their own challenges that they've faced through either migratory backgrounds, through queerness, through gender expression. And I think what is beautiful about that is that the bar is such a social atmosphere, and that's really what a bar can really provide. And I think that's where, when we look at, to sort of come back to the question of what was the intention to take the neighbourhood and provide something, is we're very proud, and all of us that work in the team, the staff, and also our customers who create this with us, are proud to have created a space that wasn't really there in the same capacity prior. And I think that's a really amazing achievement that bars and community can do together.
No, I just want to latch on to that idea of community, and I think when or if you're hoping or willing to transform a neighborhood in your city, then that sense of collaboration is essential. Not only maybe what we have done in Amsterdam when it came to a development of neighborhoods, is really thinking about what kind of licensing can we install. And one of the big accomplishments what we did in Amsterdam was 24-hour licenses for bars and clubs and multidisciplinary spaces. And that was the first time that the city actually looked at licensing in a different way. Instead of just saying you need to have all your safety and security measures in place, more looking at, okay, what kind of content is this bar creating? And it could be food, it could be music, it could be all sorts of things, and a mix of functions was very important. And that is something that came forward by lobbying and advocating to the city and trying to let the city explain to the city why it's needed to have a more variety, or have a diversity in the offering, because that's what we're striving for, and definitely working together with other bars in your neighborhood really helps to showing the value, but also diversifying the offering, which leads to getting more people in.
I think that's very important points both of you are making. I think before going into advocacy, which I think also connects the three of us as one of the core things that we are doing within nightlife culture or nightlife economy, I found it very interesting, because me as an advocate in the club commission, I focus a lot on safer spaces, on intentional spaces, and so on. And just when you were saying that you created the bar to create this community and safer space, I was just reminded of, or kind of challenging also, isn't a bar a lot of times the safest place in your neighborhood, in the sense that I remembered going to a bar and there are my neighbors, and you can sit there by yourself and the bartender is your friend, and you just start a conversation and you feel like you belong. Also when you're kind of moving a lot around the world or a lot of around spaces, that there's this initial connection a lot of times in an area, when we're bringing it back to the neighborhood, is happening in a bar, or in Berlin maybe also in a Späti, which is kind of doubling as a bar. And so yeah, just a thought that I had, like a memory that came to me just now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also, it's of course in that sense, it's also a place where people, of course, exchange ideas, get to know, exchange ideas, get to know each other better. Of course, I think the obvious is always like it's the second home.
Yeah.
But also, there was a famous person that once said, many revolutions have started in a bar, because that's where we come
no
together.
wall but Stonewall, right?
Or maybe a coffee shop or a tea place, That's I think where a lot of social interaction and also how we look at the world and is being discussed, and yeah, that function is there as well for bars and places.
The culture and the social fabric that you mentioned, right? Like a lot of times I think we forget that you need to learn how to move also in a different city, because there are different habits, there are different cultures, and I think when we're talking about social fabric and culture, I think bar is kind of the first where you hear people that are actually of the culture, of the area, talk and see how they think, and yeah, maybe also the first place that you can assimilate a little bit into a place. I think that was really...
And it counts for, in this sense, it counts for maybe like a bar that you're running, but it can also be a cocktail bar, or it can also be, a more games and leisure activity. It doesn't always have to be, performing arts.
Yeah.
It can also be any craft basically that you're.
Yeah, I was actually exactly that saying, zooming out of what we consider a safer community or a safer space for a specific community today, but more going into Berlin has a very, very broad corner bar culture actually, when you think about it. And you mentioned already the no curfew advocacy, right? Like when you think about the history of the city, we thought that was part of freedom, after the Second World War. So they came out with this no curfew on the Western Territory or side. So I think that's very interesting. Okay, that being said, when we had our pre-conversation, we realized what is bonding us as well is not only have we started in a bar, but we're all leaning into advocacy for nightlife and night economy. So maybe Mirek, for you, what is kind of your view when you're thinking about the question that we're discussing and the advocacy work that you're doing with Vibe Lab particularly? What do you think is the value? Why is it so important to kind of go into advocacy when you're running a bar?
No, for sure. Yeah, so just to highlight quickly, so after coming away from the night mayor role, I started a company and co-founded a company together with Lutz Leitzenring, spokesman of the Berlin Club Commission. It's called Vibe Lab, which is a purpose-driven consultancy. We try to preserve nighttime culture in cities around the world, but also support creative communities, as we were just discussing. And we strongly believe that by working together, you can develop synergies, which everybody benefits from in the long term. But the issue, the thing is often, first you need to create the story yourself. You need to create, let's say, a narrative or a discourse. Like what combines us as operators in nightlife? What is our shared?
The essence.
Yeah, what's the essence of why do we like what we're doing? Why do we organize? Why do we get together? So I think that's always an important step. But then secondly, it's also very much about speaking the same language, because people on the maybe policy side, they might have totally different interests. Maybe their interests only, I want to make sure that this neighborhood is quiet and there's nobody walking around on the street at night. But is that actually what the neighbors and the operators in that neighborhood want? Because there's so many stories about, a vibrant street is often safer than an empty bus stop, So it's really about also finding what are these synergies, what are the things, what are the topics which are really grasping what is actually what is valuable for the community, and try to vocalize that and to speak to entities, and whether these are stakeholders, could be property developers, can be government, it can be on many levels. So advocacy is not something that is always towards government. It can also be amongst yourself, or it can be maybe with neighbors that are not happy that you're there. So there's a lot of different levels, but finding synergies, developing a discourse, and understanding what bonds you.
Francis, you've joined the club commission I would say rather newly, right, also sitting on the board. How has, working with the Club Commission, you mentioned it before, but like maybe for anybody, first of all, that doesn't know what the Club Commission is, and just describe it and then also tell us how it has affected operating a bar for you, or operating the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the greatest things that the Club Commission is creating in Berlin and has been is sort of to close out where Mira closed out this point of synergy and bringing that idea of togetherness rather than isolating different venues or any idea of competition. But I think that synergy across nightlife that has been created is one of the chief achievements, perhaps. In not alienating any venues, or not alienating nightlife, and not distancing nightlife as its own unique, this sits here, but rather creating synergies amongst one venue operators, amongst collectives, also amongst neighbourhoods, amongst local government, and bringing all of these factors together to recognise that there is a collective shared experience to be had here that is not just about the people who are accessing the space. It's not just about the people who are operating them, not just about the factors or the policies that affect them. And I think that synergy and that level of communication that's been created is a really great thing to be a part of. I first was introduced to the Club Commission as a venue essentially looking for help through the problems that we were facing. And I think that there is an institution that is allowing that level of support, that level of consultancy to then take also experiences from other venues and almost act as this gel between everybody. That what we were facing was also very similar to stories that many other venues have faced in different ways, in different capacities, in different sizes, whether they were smaller, whether they were larger. And the Club Commission was able to act in its consultancy element as bringing all those experiences from other venues and the stories that they've had with their problems in order to really come up with quite a good solution to move forward, that was healthy, that was not antagonistic, that was not aggressive, but rather really looking at finding a community-based approach to any problems that were being faced on hand, using past experiences from maybe 6 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, of venues larger, venues smaller. And that was sort of how that introduction for me got made. And what followed from that was really a very big interest in this idea of working as a much more community-based orientation and trying to connect with other venues, trying to start levels of conversation as well around problems being faced and how to find constructive elements to actually approach and resolve them rather than just sort of shutting off in antagonistic perspectives or approaches.
No, it's like, yeah, no, I think it's really spot on everything you're saying, and I think one of the things we worked on in Amsterdam is also there's a nightlife district in Amsterdam called Rembrandtplein, which is a famous entertainment district in the center of town. And there's a lot of small bars and restaurants and all these hospitality establishments which are around there. But late at night there was always people at some point didn't want to come into the neighborhood anymore because there was one demographic that was really dominating this square, and definitely late at night. And by working together with all the bars and the restaurants and establishing a sort of business improvement district, I think it's a big word, but a little association of all the bars and all the hospitality operators, and together with the city there was like a public-private funded project where by really looking at your neighborhood in a 360 way, we managed to get down alcohol-related violence by a whole set of measures. It's not like waving your magic wand and you're just centralized.
One campaign and that's enough.
And it's enough. Yeah, let's not pretend that that's the case. But really working together and working in a 360 way and looking at all the different aspects of what are the issues that are in the neighborhood. What can be done about lighting, what can be done about PSC campaign, what can be done about one of the most important things was that there was always this police force on the street or in the square late at night. And actually when you have a lot of police force, it also creates a quite aggressive atmosphere, definitely when it comes to 3-4 in the morning. So a whole set of measures was taken, but I think what the trade-off was is that on the one hand the operators, all the bars and the bars and the nightclubs, got extended opening hours so they can stay open longer, also the bars can stay open longer, to spread out people more over the night, instead of having everybody being together, trying to drink before 1 o'clock, getting everybody out, getting everybody to the door. And really by working together and extending the opening hours. That was a really big pitch we did with the mayor, because like it sounds counterproductive, right? Like opening hours longer makes it more safe. So it was a big pitch, but we managed to, by having communal police, so people controlling the street every Friday and Saturday night, de-escalating the situation when there was an issue, really looking into, okay, where are the issues, where are the reports of nuisance, of public urination, antisocial behavior, what are the areas we have to, illuminate better at night. And with extending opening hours, we managed to get the reports of nuisance, of reports of issues. We really managed to get it down by 30%, and reports of alcohol-related violence by 20%, and that's a big win for politicians, right? So it's really, it's like, finding what is the sweet spot and how can we manage it, how can we address it, and then in the end everybody will benefit in the neighborhood.
If I may jump in there, because we talked about your advocacy work from a vibe-led perspective, and one of the things that you shared with me, or that I know of that you're doing, is also kind of researching the vibrancy and like the economic benefit for cities. And I sense that that you somehow made the government in Amsterdam believe that it's worth investing in that sense. So maybe you can share a little bit from your experience, like in terms of how do you make it measurable that there is an economic impact or like an impact on the social fabric to a city and neighborhood?
Yeah, for sure. I think the case we could make in Amsterdam is that nightlife and that the city benefits from a vibrant night from social, cultural and economic perspective. The issue always is when we speak or research the urban night, when it comes to we know there's a huge economic impact, but when there's an issue, and the pandemic made that very clear, when there is an issue like a pandemic or when there's a lot of noise or sound or violence or whatnot, then the support really goes away quite quickly from a government perspective. So we like to look at beyond the economic impact and really looking at the social and cultural impact. So what we developed is the Creative Footprint. The Creative Footprint is a research project where we measure and compare cities with each other and really look into 3 key aspects. And I think that's why it's so important to get that story and to mobilize everyone. You have the community aspect or the content aspect. So what kind of content are bars, nightclubs, whatever, are they creating? But also looking into creative space. Well, if you are a bar owner or if you ever opened a venue, you know the space it's always about location. What is your space and how does that work? But also it's the policy framework again. So what are the opening hours? Can you organize events in public space? So and I think these 3 key indicators, they measure or they are the foundation of a vibrant night and why people want to live in Berlin or Amsterdam or London, and why so many like smaller cities are also struggling in attracting and retaining talent and making sure that that you have a vibrant scene and a vibrant night. So this research project we have done now in 5-6 cities around the world. A lot of the major cities like New York, Berlin, also Tokyo, and even Montreal and Stockholm we have researched. But I think what is really interesting is diving into that city, knowing what is happening on district level, understanding how many music venues and creative spaces. We'd like to speak about creative spaces and bars where something is happening, and showcasing to cities why they should care. So what does it mean to us? So it means, if you have a question, go ahead.
I just wanted to say the most economic impact, the biggest economic impact is for real estate, because real estate prices go up, so this is very easy to measure. And the other one is tourism, and that's also very easy to measure.
Yeah, 100%. the question always is like what we often see is that like many that hospitality, nightlife, hospitality is really often used for area development, and that's also because like and I think that goes a little bit, that's counterproductive for the industry, because we are invited to come to a new neighborhood, open up your bar, open up your nightclub, and then yes, real estate prices go up because we make it more vibrant. And then as soon as the first residents come in, gentrification, basically then we have to move out. So I think what we try to do with our report is to find arguments why the city should care and why the city should protect these spaces that actually shape the identity of the city. Because yeah, it's that identity that brings in tourists and brings in economic benefit.
I think there is also, two sides of the same coin with tourism. I think one thing being, of course, you want and need tourists in the city, but like how do you actually incorporate like your local tourists in a sense? How can you make sure that your neighbors or like people are actually part of it, and that without driving the costs more for locals to still enjoy what is in the city? I mean, I think Berlin is really at the verge sometimes, or has been at the verge before the pandemic, and now with the rising costs and production of running any space, including a bar, including a club. I think we're like in an interesting time, and maybe you want to add to that, like how is it in terms of, do you attract like touristic people, or is it more like local people that are joining your bar?
I think for ourselves, I mean, it's a really interesting question, because the question of tourism as a whole, as we just addressed, it has its own effect on bars and on spaces. Sometimes it can be positive, it can be economically positive, but can also run the risk, of course, of detracting a little bit of the social fabric. A bar, I think, is defined a lot by the people who regulate it, is always going to be the biggest defining factor. For ourselves, there is, of course, sharing our community with people who are interested, people who are looking for that. That is always an interesting thing to be able to do. Nor do our customers mind if there are tourists coming into the bar, but we always have to try and navigate this fine line, where for us it's important that whilst there are benefits to tourism and also the cultural exchanges that follow from this, we also want to make sure that there is the local element of people who live there feeling their space. And one of the nice things about a bar, I think, and what we strive to try and maintain and achieve, and I think you sort of mentioned it earlier as well, that you can walk in by yourself on a Tuesday night, maybe you're just feeling a little bit so-so, you've had a rough day, you don't really want to go home and watch TV, and you can walk into the bar that you regulate, and all of a sudden you can see 8 people and go, oh, hello, how are you? Have a drink and then start having a chat, or you meet somebody new who you might see in the same space 2 weeks later. And I think that's something that we've always been fond of creating, because we do like that idea that anybody can walk in on an evening and they can sort of almost feel like it's become their living room in a way, and that they have this sense of familiarity. And I think that that's where tourism becomes this really challenging factor, where it's almost like too much tourism. Where is too much, and how do we define too much? But when we do step over the line, of course, location, coming back to that, does have an effect. There are always going to be certain areas of the city that are far more touristically populated, and you can see the effect on the venues there, that they don't tend to be the venues in those neighborhoods that are regulated by people who are locals and living in the city. And it's more venues in a quieter part of the city or in a local neighborhood that doesn't necessarily have many tourist attractions around, that tend to be the venues that are a bit more focused. For ourselves, because I think it's maybe we can easier mitigate it, because we do have quite a strong sort of community sense to the venue. We do have quite a strong community in what we're trying to achieve as a queer venue, rather than just calling ourselves owning a bar. And I think that also draws with it the tourism that does come into our venue, or might find us online. We try and limit how much we publish online in that regard. But it creates this intention that when tourism does come into our venue, they are coming with the intent. They are queer themselves, they are after a show, and then that sort of melds quite well with the atmosphere that we have. So even if there are some groups of tourists, they're able to have a common ground with the locals who are in there as well, and it's not a detriment to the atmosphere at all. It's also creating further cultural exchange and interest and conversations with people from different backgrounds, which is also always a very beneficial thing for anyone to have.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is definitely that you need to be very intentional about who you are, and that will like kind of like create and also foster kind of a very strong local community. Moreover, having to rely basically on tourism. But yeah, one question for me that we haven't really discussed also before is when we're thinking about the development of a city in terms of an urban space, gentrification, and all these things, like how can we actually preserve? And I know we, the three of us, we're working very much on like a political kind of or lobbyist kind of way or process of assisting as much as possible with legislation that can be changed and being kind of vocal about it. But I'm wondering with everybody here in this space, like what can, you know, stakeholders, people that work in bar, people that work for alcohol brands, people that work in music and everything that is adjacent and necessary for the bar, also assist in creating and shaping, you know, the bar of the future, of today. Yeah.
Is that something you want to ask the audience?
If somebody has thoughts, that would be amazing. Like, if there's somebody who wants
to jump in?
I mainly have a question because I really love what you're talking about. I was thinking that you are from cities like Amsterdam and Berlin. So if you were to sum up your best tips for people like me, like bartenders or people who are still like a bit down the chain in the industry, what would be the things that we could do to have an impact? Because when we look into the political aspect of it, how could me as a bartender, how could I go find someone? What are the steps I could take? Because of course I can collaborate with my local community, I can collaborate with the guests I have in my bar, but what will be the next step if I would like to have a greater impact? What would be your sum up tips that you have for people like me? Or I guess more bartenders in here, what is it that we could do to influence?
Yeah, if I can respond, then thank you. And I understand that because it feels like, oh, this is like there's, but what I truly believe in advocacy, so in advocating and speaking for your community, it always starts with making the first step. So, of course, if you speak about changing laws and that's really far away, but it really always starts with making that first step. And for example, a good example that we had here, I think the Club Commission did it or Lutz did it. There was a little group which was formed, which was with, I think it was club managers in that sense. And these club managers, they came together once a year, they organized a big dinner, and they were speaking about the things that were essential for them. So if we would compare this to your role, then maybe the first step is to invite bartenders from your 5, or maybe you work in a place yourself, but maybe go to 5 bars that you really would love to go and speak there with your peers and say, hey, why don't we form a little group of 5? And it often starts with just organizing a dinner once a year. To share the ideas. Okay, what are the needs that you have as a bartender working in this level? Because maybe you have the ambition to at some point own a bar. I don't know if you have that ambition, but maybe you have it. So maybe the step is getting together with people that are which are your peers and which are on the same level, and then maybe inviting a bar owner to come and speak about their experiences at some point, and try to see if you can learn something from that at least. And maybe the next step is, to put something on paper and say, okay, what do bartenders need in my city? What do we want to do? And then slowly progress from there.
I think there's a lot of what you said, which is very much true. When I think about my time at a bar, obviously initially I just needed money, and it was for me like an easy way to kind of start somewhere. But very quickly I took it serious in the sense I really wanted to improve my skills. And you coming here, being in a conference, mixing and mingling with a lot of other people, I think that's like one of the biggest things you can actually do to get inspired, which SIP is also about share, inspire, pioneer, right? So you are here, you're getting input, and for me, it started with asking a lot of questions, which is kind of annoying, but asking myself questions on how can I make my party more inclusive or more secure, or how can we be more diverse while being open, and all these things. And I asked these questions in roundtables like this, and eventually somebody from the club commission said, hey, you know what, why don't you ask these questions from within the organization, because nobody is committed to asking these questions at the moment. And that's how I got into it. It wasn't planned. I wasn't like, oh, I want to start an advocacy. It was more like I was being annoying, like honestly. I was just being annoying, and I think it needs people that have passion to ask questions and be very it could be related to your working conditions. It could be related to really anything. And I think sometimes what holds us back is really thinking that other people don't have the same problems. But when you speak up, a lot of people have the same problem, and then you will find commonality, and then you will go away from the problem into solution. And I think that really helped me also move jobs and roles and so on. Yeah. Yes.
Also adding to this, obviously I'm working for SIP, so I'm not super objective, but definitely I think some platforms like SIP, but there are some other ones, so you can go with. But I think the way trade advocacy and brands are working right now is also evolving. And so, yes, you have the opportunity to gather with your peers and think in the long run about doing lobbying with politicians, etc. But think also about different partners, such as brands and big companies that could be also partners to arrive at this stage. Because we do have also a lot of contacts, PR, relationships in this field. And so we could also be seen as partners, not only to sell you bottles, but also actually move the lines and start talking about real issues of the industry. And in a way, I think this is what we're doing now. So in a way, you're already making this first step because you're sitting here with a brand.
I think you got two very good answers, but I was going to say very much like you did as well. I think it begins with interest, and you being here yourself is already that first step that there is an interest. And once there's an interest, then what follows from that is communal exchange. The ideas of different avenues to find that exchange, and also it can be found within the venue. It can be found by talking to the colleagues that you work with, and also including the management of that venue in the discussion. Hey, what do you think about trying to collaborate more with the bars that are nearby us, and working with the venue as well? And I think from my experience, it's always anybody willing to take more active involvement in whatever capacity or level is always an amazing thing to see from somebody. And I think that level of communal exchange, one internally in a venue, two externally with other venues. There are working groups set up around the city, there are places for exchange, there are round tables, and I think that these steps are really such a great beginning, that once the interest is there, it just naturally almost evolves upon its own self.
I think that, yeah. I just also remember, there's so many things that come to me today, it's very funny. I also remember Sasha Disselkamp, who's also on the executive board of the club commission. I used to work in a bar restaurant that he co-owned suddenly, he joined the team, and then I was in a place where I didn't know what I wanted to do next, and I was really, lost. And I remember just asking him to have a sit down with me, and then we talked about different options, and I feel like that's also a really good one. Just asking people that are maybe, that you think are way above the pay grade or not in the same level as you, just to see if they want to have a coffee. I think that's always also good, good one, and now we're sitting on the same board. So I think it's funny how life works in this way, right? So, yeah. Cool. So let's, do you have a question? No, don't talk to me. Okay. So, I think we're going slowly in the time where we're slowing down and kind of rounding up this topic, and I was just going to see if what can people really take away? What is it that we're kind of wanting wanting people to understand about how bars shape spaces. How do we actually contribute ultimately?
Yeah, if you ask me like what I hope, and thank you for your time already for being here with us. What I do hope is, I think it all, and maybe I'm echoing what is already all the good things that were already said, but I really think it starts with passion. It starts with looking into yourself. What do I want, and what do I want for my community? And your community sounds always so big, and it's now such a trendy word, but it's also okay. What is my sphere of influence basically? What are the topics that we want to discuss? How can I bring that to the forefront? Yeah, and then what I said before, how can you build synergy, between the people around you, and even if you influence only the people around you, maybe that's already enough. That's where it all starts, and that's also where it started for me. I wanted to do something fun, and I want to learn something while doing it, and that can lead to that you carve out a space for yourself. And for the people around you.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic walkaway and a great little conclusion as well, because I to echo again some of the fantastic conversations we've had, and thank you. The idea of starting with interest and then moving forward with that, I believe, is a very empowering experience to then have, and the exchanges that can follow from that. And I think that what we've seen taking shape and through numerous different people's work around the city, or other cities as well, is that I think that bars and nightlife in general is becoming a bit more of a communal factor, and I think this is a really, really strong progression, that elements for community exchange and cultural exchange across venues, now also intercity is taking place, is a really great thing to keep that momentum going, and that the collectivization of these venues can really impact their longevity and how they operate, and help mitigate the problems that, of course, every bar will face around inflation, around future possibilities like the pandemic that hit, and that community engagement of not isolating yourselves, but rather communal exchange between venues to try and resolve the problems we may be facing, resolve issues around gentrification, around rising rents, and so on. I think it can really only be maintained and kept through that level of engagement between venues, between bartenders, between venue managers. And I also want to make the point that we're not just talking about management, but anybody within this scene can have a really powerful impact just by being passionate and by exchanging their ideas, and by be willing to move forward and discuss with other people to establish these steps that then turn into much larger factors. And create that presence as a community on the whole. I think to be a very, very important transition that needs to be continued.
I think that's a very good word, transition. And I think both of you and all this, like the last hour that we've been talking, I think it's so multi-layered. There is definitely an economic impact. You're really shaping your neighborhoods, and you need to be intentional about it. You need to define what you're about. Are you a queer community? What kind of community? What do you foster? What do you value? And once you do that, there is a sense of cultural identity and social fabric kind of being nurtured and created, and maintaining that is essential. And what I also heard is that as you progress, as you gain fame, or there is a sense of commercialization, tourism, that it's important also to tackle issues that are not singular, that are more structural, that us as stakeholders, we band together, and that we're not afraid to go into dialogue and open communication and lean on each other, so that we can focus on continuing to run a bar, because it shouldn't be on a single bar to advocate for the same issues over and over again. If we are affected by gentrification, or if we are affected by the rising cost of beer, then we should band together and try and lobby as one, and by doing that, ensuring a vibrant, diverse bar scene, night scene, and I think that's a really nice wrap for this topic, and thank you everybody for being here. And I think this topic allows for us to meet again and again and again. I think there's always like focuses. I think with everything that is developing in terms of innovation and digitally, who knows? Maybe the bar of the future is not locally anymore, and we can like. That was some really shocked faces. I'm just saying. Obviously, like these are things that we will discuss also in the future. Things are progressive, and yeah, we're gonna adapt and we're gonna meet again. Thank you.